November 1923, Berlin. A single loaf of bread costs 200 billion marks. By the time a factory worker finishes a morning shift, the cash in his pocket is already worth less than it was at dawn. Housewives rush to markets with baskets, not to shop carefully, but to spend money as fast as possible before prices rise again. Children play with stocks of banknotes like building blocks. Savings built over decades evaporate in weeks. This is Weimar Germany at the peak of hyperinflation, and it poses a question that echoes far beyond one country and one century. How does a modern currency, trusted, stable, widely accepted, suddenly become worthless? At first glance, the Weimar hyperinflation looks like an anomaly, a freak accident of history, a defeated nation, crushed by war reparations, printing too much money. End of story. But here's where it gets interesting. When we step back, when we trace the stages carefully, a familiar pattern begins to emerge, one that appears not just in Germany, but across centuries and empires, from ancient Rome's debased denarius to revolutionary France's assignats, to more recent collapses in Latin America and Eastern Europe. The pattern is not just economic, it's psychological. Because currencies don't die when numbers get too big, they die when trust breaks. Weimar Germany offers one of the clearest case studies of this process ever recorded, not because it was unique, but because it unfolded with extraordinary speed, precision, and documentation. We can see every stage, every decision, every rational choice that quietly pushed the system closer to collapse. And that is why it still matters today. This episode isn't about panic or prediction, it's about understanding the mechanics of currency trust, how it's built, how it erodes, and how quickly it can disappear once the public crosses an invisible line. At Economy Rewind, the mission is simple: uncover the patterns that shaped money, power, and prosperity, so they're impossible to ignore when they reappear. And in the case of Weimar Germany, the pattern is unmistakable. To understand why currency trust suddenly dies, we have to begin before the collapse, before the wheelbarrows of cash, before the headlines. We have to return to a country that once believed its money was as solid as any in the world. Chapter 1. Historical Context: A Currency Built on Confidence. Before it became a cautionary tale, Germany was an economic success story.
In 1913, on the eve of World War I, the German mark was one of the most respected currencies in Europe, backed by gold, issued by a powerful industrial nation, and trusted both at home and abroad. Berlin rivaled London and Paris as a financial center. German banks financed railways, factories, and global trade. This stability wasn't accidental. It was the result of decades of disciplined fiscal policy and rapid industrial growth. Germany exported steel, chemicals, machinery, products the world needed. The mark represented not just money, but national credibility. Then came August 1914. When war broke out, Germany made a decision that would quietly set the entire pattern in motion. Like most major powers, it abandoned the gold standard. Gold was hoarded, convertibility was suspended. The promise was temporary. The war, officials believed, would pay for itself. Instead of raising taxes sharply, a politically dangerous move, Germany financed the war largely through borrowing and money creation. War bonds were sold to citizens with patriotic appeals. Printing presses worked overtime, but the inflationary effects were muted at first. Wartime controls masked rising prices. Shortages were blamed on blockades, not monetary policy. This is stage 1. Extraordinary spending justified by extraordinary circumstances. And it didn't feel reckless, it felt necessary. By 1918, Germany had lost the war, but the financial reckoning was only beginning. The Treaty of Versailles imposed reparations that would come to define the Weimar Republic's fate. The final figure, set in 1921, amounted to 132 billion gold marks, a sum deliberately denominated in gold or foreign currency, not paper marks. Why does that matter? Because Germany couldn't print gold. The new Weimar government inherited a shattered economy, political instability, and a currency no longer anchored to anything tangible. Industrial production was disrupted. Millions of soldiers returned home to unemployment. The tax base collapsed. And yet, the obligations remained. This is stage 2. Structural debt that cannot be inflated away, at least not directly. Faced with impossible demands, German policymakers chose what appeared to be the least painful option:
They printed marks to buy foreign currency. They printed marks to cover budget deficits. They printed marks to avoid social unrest. At first, inflation was visible, but manageable. A US dollar cost about 8 marks. By 1921, it cost 64 marks.
Painful, yes, but not catastrophic. Many Germans had seen price increases before. Wages adjusted, businesses adopted. The public largely accepted official explanations: war damage, foreign pressure, temporary instability. This is where human psychology matters. People didn't lose trust because prices rose. They lost trust later, when explanations stopped matching lived reality. Middle-class families who had done everything right began to feel the strain. Fixed incomes lagged behind prices. Savings lost purchasing power quietly, month by month. Pensioners suffered first, then salaried workers. Still, few believed the currency itself was in danger. After all, this was Germany, an industrial powerhouse, a nation of engineers and planners. Surely, control would be restored. What most people couldn't see yet was the vulnerability forming beneath the surface. Because the mark no longer represented stored value, it represented political necessity. And once money becomes a tool to delay pain rather than measure value, the pattern accelerates. What started as a post-war adjustment was becoming something else entirely. And then, in 1923, a single decision would push the system past the point of recovery.